Way of the Samurai 3 is actually a fairly recent addition to my game collection, relatively speaking. I bought it about a year ago in 2021. I decided to start with the third one because it was the cheapest game in the series I could find, and thought it would be a good test drive of what I would think of the series overall. So I got the game, popped it in, and gave it a try. To be completely honest, my first impression of the game was not very good, though looking back a lot of it was my fault. I didn't use the save feature as much as I would like, leaving me to have to restart significant portions of game progress. I button mashed my way through the game, which made combat so much harder than it needed to be, and I rushed through the story segments instead of getting money and upgrading my equipment. I was clearly not giving the game the time it needed, and it led to me getting frustrated enough with the game that I put it away without getting a single one of the game's endings. But lo and behold, Way of the Samurai 3 is our second selected game here on Tome of Silver, which has given me a second chance to play through the game, and hopefully give it a fair chance this time around. So did I manage to change my opinion on the game, or is the game just as unfun to me the second time as it was the first? Let's turn the page and see for ourselves. Way of the Samurai 3 is an action role-playing game, taking place during the early Sengoku period. You play as a nameless samurai, who you name and customize yourself. This samurai was part of a large battle between two clans, the Sakurai clan and the Fujimori clan. The Fujimori clan proves too powerful, and the Sakurai clan is all but wiped out. Somehow surviving the bloody battle, you find yourself in the land of Amana. With nowhere to go and no one who knows you, the path your samurai can take opens up before you. In Amana, there are three main factions. There is of course the Fujimori, led by the brutal Lord Shuzen Fujimori, who seeks to gain power and control over the land. There's also the Oka clan, a clan consisting of bandits and ruffians who seek to stop the Fujimori. And finally, you have the Takatani village and its villagers. Simple farmers caught up in the struggle between the Oka and the Fujimori clans. With three factions at play, who you speak to, what factions you side with, and how your story ends is entirely up to you, as you set out to find your way of your way of the samurai. Oh, that was terrible. After watching the prologue and picking a single line of dialogue, the game immediately opens up, allowing you to go absolutely anywhere you wish, and interact with the various individuals that make up the land of Amana. Right away you can meet and join the Oka and Fujimori clans, or both if you feel like it. How you progress the story in Way of the Samurai 3 is interesting. Once you start the game, you'll notice the game starts at day 1. This is because the game has a day and night cycle. As you wander around or do tasks, you'll notice the time will pass. However, the days that pass bear absolutely no influence on the advancement of the plot. Your save data could say day 40 and you could still be on the very first phase of the game. Instead, if you look at the world map, you'll notice these little icons with exclamation marks around called inklings. Usually about 2 or 3 inklings will appear at a time, which will trigger a different event with the various characters between any of the 3 factions. In most cases, seeing one of these inklings will cause the other ones to disappear, and depending on which inklings you've seen in combination with how well you are liked by certain factions, this will change which new inklings will become available. You continue this process until you reach the 5th phase, which is when you ultimately get your final inkling and triggers the ending path you are going towards. It's for this reason that the story of Way of the Samurai 3 is hard to talk about. On one hand, I really like the game's characters. All 3 factions have various characters that you can meet, and each have their own personalities, ambitions, and relationships with other members of the cast. If you decide to work more with the Fujimori clan in your first playthrough, you'll still get glimpses of the other factions' characters. It gets you curious about what their stories are, so that next time you'll want to try maybe working with another faction, and seeing where that story may lead you. The biggest trouble with the game's narrative is that how satisfying the narrative is depends entirely on what inklings you get, which again, first-time players will have no idea what inklings trigger what without a guide. Take for example my first playthrough of the game. My first time through, while I spent a little bit of time with all 3 factions, I ended up focusing a bit more with the Takatani villagers. While I actually really loved the ending that I got in this playthrough, the path leading up to the ending stopped it from feeling as satisfying as it could have been. I spent a lot of time with Munuchika, a man who lets you live in his home while you recover, and Kota, a young boy with dreams of being a samurai. However, the ending I got actually didn't feature either of these characters at all, and instead focused on 2 different characters I had only spoken with once or twice beforehand. The ending acted like I should know who these characters were, but because I didn't get many inklings featuring these characters, I had no idea where this sudden ending was coming from, or how these 2 characters even knew each other. It felt like the event leading up to this ending just came out of nowhere, and it put a huge damper on my overall narrative experience, despite how much I liked the idea of the ending itself. My second playthrough, on the other hand, was a completely different experience. This time I set out to play as a samurai who wanted to get revenge against Shujin Fujimori for the destruction of the Sakurai clan. I thought it'd be cool to see if this goal was possible, even after joining only the Fujimori clan. This time, the inklings I got coincidentally all surrounded the various characters of the Fujimori clan. Now the narrative was starting to play out like I'm a samurai who has infiltrated the Fujimori ranks, slowly gaining the trust of the other officers and working my way up to earn the trust of Lord Shuzin himself, finally getting my revenge once Shuzin reached the absolute apex of his power. It was honestly such a cool story to experience, made even better by the fact that it was my choices that made the story present itself in the way it did, and I genuinely had such a blast. Ultimately, the experience of the game's story will be different for everyone depending on how well the Inkling events line up with your ending. At best, it can make for a genuinely fun narrative, and at worst, a disjointed mess that kind of feels like it just ends. The story itself is also pretty short. Most playthroughs will take anywhere from about 2 to 4 hours depending on how many side missions you decide to do along the way. However, the game boasts 22 different endings, so there's lots of different opportunities to try new things and replay the game. But the problem is that because the story is so short, when you get your first ending it always feels like the game ends just as it really starts to get going. I understand that the short length is to incentivize players to get all the endings, but it really can make it feel like you only finished the prologue of a much bigger game. Nevertheless, there's definitely still fun to be had in making your own samurai story and seeing what ending you get, make no mistake. There's just a number of hiccups that stop it from being as satisfying as it could be. Let's now shift focus to the actual gameplay of Way of the Samurai 3. Before even starting the game, you of course need to create a character. You start off with very limited options, with most of them needing to be unlocked. You unlock additional customization by getting endings and receiving titles with your ending. This rewards you samurai points, which progressively unlocks you additional faces, outfits, and accessories that you can use to customize your samurai on further playthroughs. I didn't really like this decision. I think leaving the accessories as unlockables makes sense, since a lot of them are goofier and more out there, like an angel wing or sci-fi visors, and they're meant more for fun. But being restricted on what my samurai's basic appearance looks like is disappointing, as it means I won't be able to make my samurai really feel like my own until 5 or more playthroughs, and it takes away a more personal connection you could have created with the character. That being said, the samurai point system is very easily exploited, and knowing the right trick can let you unlock everything in under an hour, which did let me create my character the way I wanted to. But the average player who doesn't know this exploit will be stuck with a pretty boring looking character for a while, and that's just a shame. Visually, the game looks alright. The character models have some good detail to them, and the environments serve their job well. Unfortunately, the characters don't have a whole lot of movement to them, which can lead to a lot of scenes of the characters just kinda standing there. The music of the game is pretty good. The game doesn't have a lot of music tracks, but everything that was there was pretty good, my favorite being the nighttime theme. It has an ominous feeling to it, like deciding to wander around so late at night is dangerous. It's great stuff. As for the voice acting, it's fine. Most of the performances here are passable, nothing particularly great, but some actors are just not very good.
Oh, damn. Someone's alive. They actually survived. Who is it? Hey, who are you? Are you okay?
Now mechanically, this game actually has quite a lot going for it that really sets it apart from other games. Throughout the story, you'll be given various opportunities to select dialogue options that can influence your relationship with certain characters and factions. Pretty standard stuff so far. But what Way of the Samurai also has is an option to draw your sword at almost any time. During conversations, you'll notice a red icon may appear. Hitting this button will make your character draw their sword, more often than not triggering a combat encounter with whomever is present. This adds to the various options of each story. Do you notice the leader of the Oka clan attempting to abandon his men during a siege? You can talk to them, sure, or you can draw your sword and fight him for his cowardice. See two members of the opposite factions fighting one another? You can wait and see how it plays out, or you can draw your sword to get a piece of that action for yourself, commencing a 3-way conflict between the warriors. There's so many options that can change how the story progresses, and it's such a great idea. I know I made a lot of negatives about how the story can be a jumbled mess because of how many different options there are to progress, but I won't pretend that giving the players this much freedom on how they can affect the story isn't just plain cool. Whether you trigger a fight yourself, or are attacked by wandering crossroad killers, or are forced into combat during the story, at one point or another you'll need to draw your blade and fight. It is an action role-playing game after all, and the combat of this game is where it really starts to shine. The game's combat is pretty easy to pick up and play. You have light attacks, slower but stronger heavy attacks, and a block button. As you fight more enemies, you'll gain skill points, which will unlock additional moves and combat options as you play. You start off with a moderate sword, which comes with pretty basic stats. But as you progress, you can find other swords with higher stats, or even other kinds of weapons such as spears and ninja blades. Not only do these weapons all have different movesets from one another, they also have different stances. You can choose between a high stance, a medium stance, or a low stance, which also have their own moveset to go with them. This gives the game so much variety, and lets players play around with a bunch of options to find a fighting style that really suits them. And if that wasn't enough, you can also visit the blacksmith. Here, you can upgrade your weapon, giving it a greater focus in either attack or defense, once again letting you further customize your fighting style. As you play, you can pick up and buy different types of blades, guards, and grips, bring them to the blacksmith, and you can even create your very own sword, one potentially even stronger than any one you can pick up during gameplay. You even get to name it! That's so cool! Your approach to combat can also influence how the story progresses as well. When fighting, you can press the select button to change if you use the blade or blunt side of your sword. If you use your blade, once the enemy HP drops to 0, they will be killed. However, if you use the blunt side, when the enemy runs out of health, they'll instead just fall unconscious. Sometimes, using a particular side of the sword is necessary for certain side missions. While this option doesn't do much for the typical mooks you encounter during the story, it can play a huge factor if you're fighting a named officer. Take for example Yuma, an Oka officer most first-time players are likely to encounter early in the game, trying to take supplies from what Yuma believes to be Fujimori's soldiers. Depending on your dialogue choices and actions here, it's possible he may end up taking a liking to you or challenging you to a fight. During this fight, using the blunt side of your sword will knock him unconscious, so you'll see him again in future parts of the story. However, if you use your blade side and kill him, that's it, Yuma's dead. He won't appear any further in the story, and any scenes or endings that featured him won't happen anymore because you chose to kill him, which will change how your story proceeds. It's such a great idea, continuing to give the player just that much more freedom of choice. I do have one complaint about the combat, however. In Way of the Samurai 3, every NPC you meet can be killed, and once you kill them, they're gone forever. However, hitting or killing an NPC that doesn't hold a weapon is considered a dishonorable act, which will subtract those samurai points you earn from completing the game from your total, and that penalty can be pretty significant. The problem is, when you enter combat, the NPCs remain where they are on the map. This means when you are fighting an enemy, you can accidentally misjudge your swing and strike an NPC and get hit with a penalty. This is made worse when you realize that the only possible method of saving is by speaking with Biwayoshi, who are NPCs themselves. There are a limited number of these Biwayoshis around, and yes, they too can be killed. It's entirely possible that you can get into a combat encounter around these guys, and either you or the enemy themselves can accidentally kill them, and once they die, that's one less save point for the rest of the playthrough. While it's unlikely that you'll be unlucky enough to be put in a situation where every one of these save points has been killed, the fact that you can lose save points through the actions of enemies entirely outside of your control really sucks, and I wish they at least implemented one save point in the game outside of these NPCs. Still, like I said, it's unlikely you'll be put in a situation like that, so I won't harp on it too much, but it's worth noting. So, what did I think about Way of the Samurai 3? Well, I really enjoyed my time with it. This game gives you so much freedom and choice that it really must be commended. Yes, how satisfying the narrative is can for the most part be purely up to chance, depending on which inklings you get and how well they mesh with your ending. But the samurai customization, once you unlock everything, all the different choices you can make both in and out of combat, and the ability to make your very own sword does so much to really make your samurai's journey feel like your own. I gotta say, I've really changed my outlook on this game from my first time playing last year. I'm really happy I was given this chance to give this game another shot and see it in a much more positive light. All in all, there's definitely a lot of great stuff to be found here, and if you wanted to play a samurai-focused RPG, this definitely scratches that itch. So, now the big question. Where does Way of the Samurai 3 rank when stacked up against Alien Isolation? While I really did have a great time with Way of the Samurai 3, it does have a number of stumbles that keep it from being really great. And so, it doesn't manage to take the number 1 spot away from Alien Isolation, and instead secures itself the number 2 spot in the ranking. So that's all I gotta say about Way of the Samurai 3. 2 fun games in a row for this ranking. We're off to a good start, I'd say. So where's our grand journey gonna take us next? Next time we're going to be looking at a series that's much more mainstream, with what perhaps may be one of the more polarizing releases. What game is that? Well, I'm afraid you're just going to have to wait and see. Thank you all so much for watching. Take care, and may we see each other again when we turn to the next chapter in the Tome of Silver.